Small, specific, valuable things tend to grow to larger things. Large, non-specific, unvaluable things very seldom tend to birth specific, valuable things.
All right, Peter, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Liam. Lovely to meet you.
Pleasure. All right. Before we jump into what you're currently doing now, I'd like to take us all back to June of 1998. And from what I understand at that point, you're selling books door to door. Can you tell me a little bit more about that experience and maybe if there's any lessons that are still kind of pertinent to this day?
He wanted to get a summer job and ideally an internship. None of the companies took interns for kind of the year before their penultimate year. So there was an advert up in college saying, start your own business, go to America, earn £500 a week, which was a lot of money to me then. And so I signed up and I went through around like a whole set of interviews, which I thought were interviews, but actually were not. They were kind of slightly more grooming than interviews, and got the job at the end and then paid for my own flights and went out to America and paid to stay in a hotel while we were trained, and then got billeted basically out to different points in America. And I got sent to West Virginia where I sold books for 12 weeks.
Interesting. Had you had any sales experience before that?
No.
So they're throwing you straight in the deep end at this point.
Yeah. It's an astonishingly good company. It's still going. And a student actually came around selling books to me in our last house and kind of started doing their pitch and got very confused when I finished their pitch for them. At the end. I was like, wait, what? And I was like, you need to come in and yeah, just kind of gave them, I know what it's like. So just kind of was able to give them a little bit of a harbour in the storm and some bit of food. And I bought a couple of books from them.
Amazing. Is there anything from that time that you still kind of take to this day and you apply to any of your kind of investments, any of your companies, any of your kind of roles as a consultant?
I mean, there was tons I learned from it. I think like in practical terms, bearing in mind it's a degree in physics, I think I learned more in practical terms from those 12 weeks than I did from my degree. I think that really kind of the deepest thing that I learned, I didn't really quite know how to put into words until somebody kind of told me after the fact, was that the stages of a sale, whether you're selling somebody over the internet or you're selling books door to door, or when I was selling my company, the stages of the sale are all the same, and somebody has to go through each of the different stages, and understanding where they are and understanding how to take them to the next stage is the most important thing in processing the sale. And if you can't take them on that journey, it's going to be really hard to sell.
I want to jump into something you kind of mentioned there. You talk about the practical applications that you learned here. And I look at kind of your tagline as well on LinkedIn, and it just screams practicality to me. Builder and coach, I make things with code. Can you unpack what that means in practice?
It's like very much what it says on the tin. It's also like, I had a few articles go very viral a couple of years back on AI. And loads of people, like 1,000 people, wanted to connect with me on LinkedIn. And so I ended up scanning through everybody's taglines on LinkedIn. And they all just become so homogenous. And people are like X, so-and-so at Uber, and just all of these company names. And you kind of realize once you see enough of them, that none of them mean anything. And one guy said, I make biscuits at Tesco's. And I was like, I quite want to talk to that guy. That's really interesting. And so I was like, how can I redo mine so that actually means something a bit more meaningful? And I coach founders and teams how to find things that people want to buy, and then how to build the things that they've found. And then I built a lot of software myself.
Before we jump into that, because I really want to break down like the product aspect of like you as an investor, you as a consultant, you working with teams, I really want to take a step back and look at kind of how you've chosen to spend your time over the years. Like when I look back on your job history, I see CEO, product manager, interim CTO, investor, advisor, coach. So you played many roles. Like what stayed consistent in your criteria for selecting roles and where you invest your time, and what's changed?
Interesting question. I've been on a mission my entire life to build a SaaS company that really works. And I haven't achieved that yet. Like, I built products that really work and things that people like, but I've never created a company that really generates significant revenue. And I'm not interested in, I, I don't think I don't think I am. I'm like not particularly interested in building a unicorn or anything like that. I just want to build like a company that makes hundreds of thousands, several million pounds a year and to continue building things. And so that's always been my North Star. And combined with that, there's been a constraint, which is that I want to build things that are worthwhile and things that make a difference. I'm not kind of, because I want to build and continue building and not just kind of build and sell. And also because I've been doing things for so long that I'm not naive about what it takes. It's meant that over the years, it's become harder to know which things to start and which things to pursue. And so I've kind of basically kind of waxed in and out of periods of building and then periods of work in between building things. And then that finally reached a point where I've been able to blend the two of them together. So I think in answer to what's changed and what stays consistent, I think that the goal of building a product that's valuable and that people enjoy using and that they pay for has always stayed consistent. What I've been able to do over time is blend in paid work that's valuable enough that it gives me the time to do that, and also that's really, really interesting and fulfilling as well.
When you're evaluating different ideas, what's your selection criteria of finding something that is practical, useful, valuable? And like, how has that conversation changed since all of these AI tools came out and developed? And it seems like as we've been running the newsletter for 2 years now, so we've saw different waves and swathes of different AI tools that come out, build a reputation, then just get consumed by a new update through Claude or ChatGPT in the space of 2 months. So I'm just wondering how that factors into what you identify as valuable.
I think maybe there's two different questions in there. There's one is how do you evaluate whether something's valuable, and then the other is how do you make sure that you don't get swallowed by the rate of change in AI at the moment. I'll talk about the first one first because it's the biggest one that I think gets left on the table by most founders when they're starting, and that's how to figure out whether you've got something that's worthwhile. And the reality of most startups is that they don't make any sense. Like, that seems like a very abrupt thing to say, but they don't make sense, and they transparently don't make sense. And if you've ever been to demo days and heard people stand up a pitch and you've gone through them, you're like, you've got this idea that is like it's kind of a wing and a prayer of what a founder hopes might work at some point in the future if a whole bunch of things change. And it's too high risk for founders to take on. And in the main, it's not even a good bet for investors. Sometimes it is, but only in a very small section of those cases. And so the most valuable thing that a founder can do at the very start of a business, which is an activity that like actually runs contrary to a lot of the things that make a founder good later on in the business, is to stop and find out whether an idea is any good, and generally actually to disregard it and move on to a better version of it. But that's a very hard thing for most founders to do.
Can we break that down? One, how do you validate really quickly whether an idea is worth doing? And two, how far back do you go in terms of like first principle thinking, in terms of like where this idea stems from and how it's providing value? Do you kind of jump really deep into the human psychology? I looked at your startup just now. It's all built around kind of saving time and making someone's life easier as well. So I'm just wondering how far back you go in terms of validating that idea.
Well, that's actually an example of a startup where it didn't sufficiently validate it, which is why it's kind of on pause at the moment. And I feel that the idea matters a lot, but I think actually it's worth changing the terminology, because it's not the idea that you're looking for, it's market demand. And so when you ask about like how do you validate the idea, I'm a very deep believer that naming and terminology really matters and it's very consequential. If you use the wrong words, people focus on the wrong things. When you are starting a startup, the idea is kind of the product of the thing you're looking for. It's a side effect of it, and it's one that will kind of evolve over time. The thing you're really looking for is market demand. And if you start talking about market demand, it becomes almost tautologically validated. Like, if you are trying to validate an idea, then you are by definition choosing something that is distinct from the thing that ultimately you really want, which is market demand. Whereas if you just reframe the whole of that and you say, how would you validate the market demand that you've got? It's still a valid question, but it's a much, much shorter gap to travel to go from one side of that to the other.
In terms of AI just now, when you're kind of looking at where the problems are and where the solutions are, what areas do you think are kind of currently overhyped and what valuable ones do you think are currently being overlooked?
There's a lot more, by the way, we can talk about in terms of the validating the market demand, if you wanted to talk about that, but I can answer this question as well. They kind of loop back to a similar place in that I don't think you should ever be following market hype. I think it's a really, really bad strategy. Like the only value in market hype is aligning with it from the perspective of investors so as to heat around more than it might normally be heated, or to heat like employee hiring more than it should normally be heated. But generally, like following the heat of the market and where the opportunities are, like the heat usually lags the opportunities. And in this case, the opportunity is so huge and so overwhelming in AI that like there's a lot of overlap. But the real opportunities in AI aren't things that currently look hot. They're just really useful things.
Will they become hot? Is the opportunity here being ahead of the heat? And if so, how do you predict what will become heat?
So I think ignore heat. That's the first thing.
So to the
If
question.
something's so look, I mean, a good example is a startup that I worked with and helped help the founders start, which is Fixer. So Fixer.com was born from a bricks and mortar business. The two founders, the two original co-founders, both non-technical, and they went into a space that loads of people were very cynical about, which was kind of supplementing Gmail and building tools to make it easier to write emails, and in a space that people were very, very reticent to go into. And they really, really succeeded at it. And it's grown so significantly that it's now hot. But it's hot as a result of success. It's like the success is lagging and the heat is lagging, like what really happened there, which was really, really powerful product market fit. So I don't think you should ever think in terms of heat. It's just one of those things where if you happen to be in fashion, make the most of it, go out and raise money, hire employees that are hard to get to that point, but don't ever chase the fashion. Like it very, very rarely ends well. You should be always chasing market demand. And if you chase market demand, it will become fashionable, whatever it is.
Got you. What kind of framework do you go through when you're thinking about this, when you're trying to validate an idea? And do you have some kind of predetermined set of steps you're going through? What different models do you bring into this? Do you have focus groups? Like, talk me through that on a real break by break, like practically.
So when I first started doing things, I started doing them the way that everybody kind of instinctively does something, in that I had an idea, and this is what happened with the YC company that I started. I had an idea. I thought it seemed like a good idea. I persuaded a few people that it was a good idea, and then helped persuade some more people that it was a good idea. And then I found some industry reports and quotes from big people saying, this seems like a good idea. And I put it in a deck and I raised some money and we went out and we built it. And it was a terrifically hard business to make right. It wasn't even a business. Like it was just an idea that I thought if we pursued it would turn into a business. And it didn't. Before there was Facebook login and Google login, there was no way to log into one site using another site. You just had to have a new email and password for everything. And there weren't password managers either. And a new protocol came along that predated OAuth called OpenID that let you do that. And it was super hard to use. And we built an application that made it much easier to use. So that was the idea. We'd be at the heart of identity. And that's what Paul Graham liked. And that's why YC funded us, and that's what we built. I never had an idea what the business of that was. I just thought, well, maybe we'll be right. And then if we're right, then we'll figure it out. And the reality was we weren't right. We were wrong. And so although I sold that company, it was an ejection out of a nosedive, and it was a happy ejection, but it wasn't a glorious one. So my first experience of kind of validating an idea was going and justifying an idea. And I think that's where many, many founders start. We are desperate to start a company, to be founders, to follow the dream. And so the idea is something that we want to get under our belt so that we can go out there and raise money and get employees and like become huge and have all of the trappings that come from that, which are not as glorious as they would seem, having now been in the business for a long time. Over the years, I started taking a different approach to things. I actually went and met Eric Ries when he was still at InView, before he'd written the Lean Startup and before the Lean Startup was a thing. It was an investor I was pitching, and this investor said, "Have you ever heard of this guy called Eric Ries?" And he said, "No." And he said, "You should give him a call and go down and speak to him." So me and my co-founder gave him a call and we went down to the company he was at, which inspired a lot of the writing in the Lean Startup. And he just told us the story of it all. I was super inspired by it and super inspired by doing proper customer development. And so for the next few years, I did that, and I did customer development where you really find out kind of what the latent need for the product is with somebody without trying to sell it to them. So in a sales process, you have something that you want to persuade somebody to buy. It's not really your problem whether or not it's something they need. You just need to make them need to want it enough to buy it from you, which is something I learned selling books. But that's not the same problem you want to solve when you are deciding which thing to build. Because a good salesperson can go out and sell a lot of stuff, even if that stuff is not great, because they're good at sales. And if you come back and say, well, we sold all of this stuff, therefore we should build it, you have drawn a set of conclusions from very, very incomplete data. In fact, very distorted data. What you actually want to find out is, did these people need this and were they going to buy it without the effects of the sales process? So for a number of years, I kind of did this classic customer development where you kind of find out essentially this latent demand. Are people solving this problem already? How are they solving the problem and so on? And that really helped, and that evolved the way that I did it. But I also found that it didn't tell me that much. So I'd gone from just persuading people and justifying an idea that I already had to now going and exploring the latent demand for the idea. But that latent demand doesn't tell you enough, because it tells you whether there's potentially a market for what you're going to build, but it doesn't tell you what thing you should build. So I can go out there and find that, yes, everybody's really annoyed with taxis in San Francisco, as they were in 2010 when Uber launched. Taxis were a nightmare in San Francisco. Uber and another company called Taxi Magic addressed the same problem at the same time. And Taxi Magic was kind of a layer over existing taxis where they were essentially a dispatcher service. And the existing taxis had downloaded as an app and then would be dispatched to. Whereas Uber was full stack and kind of the taxis were dedicated to Uber. One became Uber and the other one you've never heard of. And so if you just validated the space, you would have left a lot of information on the table, because you wouldn't have known whether you should build Uber or Taxi Magic. The model I eventually moved to, and one that I now find really, really robust for determining whether or not there's real demand for something, is one where I now do a 3-phase interview. I call it the sandwich interview. And in the first stage of the interview, I come in with a thesis of some sort of product that I think people may like, but I'm loosely attached to that. I have neither strong opinions on it, nor are they strongly held. It's loose
Is this
opinions.
always the case? Is ego ever attached to the ideas anymore? Is that something you've managed to filter out over time?
I think filter is one verb. I would say, like, it just gradually gets crushed over time. it doesn't serve you at all. I have zero. I'm like the market. The thing you learn. I mean, the reason why ego is so academic in this is, like, the market is right by definition. The truth is literally already out there. People already require the thing or don't require the thing, have budget for it or don't have it. You are not fundamentally going to change that. A friend of mine who's in VC said that basically it was an incredibly insightful thing that he said to me just on Friday. And he said, if you've got the market and you've got the product, then fundamentally, like, in many ways, the entrepreneur doesn't make that much difference to it. Like, it actually is going to follow through. You're going to fulfill the potential of the combination of the two of those, one way or the other. And so the greatest leverage you have as the entrepreneur is figure out the markets and figure out what product you're going to match against the markets. They're the most valuable things you can do at the start of the company to completely change the potential trajectory of the company. So it's not even a question of ego. I'm like, it would just be dumb. It's like going into a maths exam and saying, well, doesn't your ego like think that like the answer should have been 12? You're like, it's not 12. It's just not. It's not a question of ego. Like, it's just maths.
Do you not find this with the teams that you coach or kind of young startups and stuff, that ego is not often a factor attached to this?
Yes. So you're absolutely right in that observation. I think for me, once you actually see the nature of the problem, you're like, it's completely academic what your ego thinks. It doesn't. Like, my ego is now tied around finding really, really good startups. And I'm extremely uncomfortable pitching something where I don't know fundamentally that it's really good. And if I know fundamentally that it's really good, I will pitch it incredibly hard. So my ego attachment is to that. It's to the quality. It's to the quality of the startup. And I think that founders kind of have this belief, and are kind of coached and they're coached to believe and led to believe from enough survivor stories that as long as they push hard enough, run through enough walls, stay the game long enough, are the man in the ring or the woman in the ring, and have the dust on their face, great things await them on the other side. And empirically, they don't. Empirically, most of those startups fail, even the ones that do succeed. Like, the founder often limps away after years with no money in their pocket, and a startup that people wrote about for several years, but never released any cash, like never turned into something that was acquired, never turned into something that released capital to the founder through either secondary or salary along the way. And they leave, and most of them go back into jobs elsewhere. So yes, there's a lot of emotional attachment founders have to ideas and visions, but the less they can be attached to that, the more they can be attached to what correlates with success, the more successful they become.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like you're describing a difference. One is based in faith in themselves as an individual to succeed, and the other is based in evidence. You're basing it on the kind of product market fit, right? Which is a complete, it's a complete change. Can you see that in the founders that you speak to, the teams that you work with? Can you see where someone's ego is based on the conversations you have with them?
Yeah, so there's a funny mishmash of different things that fold in. But let me answer the question you asked specifically, which is, can I see it? Yeah, you can see it once you start to work with somebody. Like, do they? And it takes a lot. Like, I've now got these things that I say that some people can pick up on being sensible and making a lot of sense. But that takes, like, not everybody sees that. So then the question is, well, why should they believe me over this like burning mission and desire and faith that they have in themselves? And over time, I have more examples of places where this process has really, really worked. And so that helps alter people's mindset. But yeah, a lot of people just want to realize the thing. Most people want to build something. Like, they want to build something more than they want to create a successful company. And so if you tell them they shouldn't build the thing, that's not an answer they're interested in. It's not a process they're interested in. They want to build this thing, and all of the rest of it is kind of rationalization around that.
You mentioned earlier in our conversation the importance of words and how that kind of dictates how someone thinks about a product or a service. Have you noticed any specific ways in which entrepreneurs speak or the verbiage they use as an indicator of that ego as well?
That is a good question. I'm not sure that I have. I mean, I can tell you in general terms that adage that Paul Buchheit, who's the Gmail founder and one of the partners at YC, said a long time back, which is, it's much easier to take something that a few people love and make it into something a lot of people like, and take something a lot of people like and make it into something a few people love. That kind of that dispersal of value and that kind of increase of entropy is true in many, many different ways. And one of the ways it's true is that really good ideas are very clearly, specifically useful. And generally, really good ideas actually seem much smaller than the market that somebody might want under normal venture circumstances. And I think in many ways, the better, and let's move away from idea, so we're talking about terminology, like the better the plan for something you are going to create and sell to somebody is, almost the more unsettling it is in terms of how small it seems as a market. It is much, much, much easier to have an amorphous, non-specific plan that looks like a $10 billion market than it is to have an extremely specific plan that looks like it will generate £1 million a month if you execute on it. And when people get close to those, they start to realize that something happens subconsciously. And as you needle in and as you you get somebody to really start answering these questions and explaining who's going to buy and what they want to produce, for what reason, they start to realize that it won't work. And they start to realize that they don't have the answers to that. And the protection mechanism that kicks in at that point is bringing a bigger story. Like, well, we'll get to those details, but what you've got to understand is the bigger vision and just how big this could be. Small, specific, valuable things tend to grow to larger things. Large, non-specific, unvaluable things very seldom tend to birth specific valuable things.
Interesting. An example that comes to mind for me is Airbnb. I'm pretty sure that started with two founders and they were there was a conference in San Francisco, I'm sure, and they knew that a lot of designers were coming, but they didn't have a place to stay because the hotels were booked out. So they were like, what if we just open up someone's house to let a lot of creative designers come in to stay at this person's house? And that started as a very small, specific solution. It was very valuable to a very specific set of people. And now I have no idea how much Airbnb is worth, but several billion. So totally. I can see where you're seeing that. I think there's countless examples of that as well. I've never been able to frame it in that way before, though.
So I'll tell you a funny story about that and just like how easy it is to miss this stuff early on. When I was launching my YC company, I was at Austin for South by Southwest, and I was sending out, we just launched the company that morning, and I was sending out a mail shot to everybody who'd signed up to the pre-launch list. And we didn't have any mailing software, so I was just sending it from Gmail. And given that we were kind of login software, we were login software and we were kind of security software, the last thing I wanted to do was like accidentally CC this list with everybody else on the list. So I was just sitting on this chair by Southwest. And I turned to the guy next to me and I was like, can you do me a favor? I have triple checked this like 5 times, but can you just like finally check that I put all of these names into the BCC field and not the CC field? And he said, yeah, you're right, you're good. And he said, oh, you were launching ClickPass? And I said, yeah. And he said, oh, that's really cool. I've seen your stuff around. And he goes, I've got a startup too. And I said, well, that's great. And I was like pretty pumped and like in my own head and so on. I said, what do you guys do? And he said, well, it's called airbedandbreakfast.com and you can like crash in anybody's home. And I was like, great. That sounds brilliant. Well, good luck with that one, mate. What's your name? And he was like, Brian. And I was like, well, nice to meet you, Brian. Best of luck with Air Bed and Breakfast.
So this was in South by Southwest as well?
Yeah.
Let's take things back. We got really deep into the first part of that, of your sandwich methodology. Can you go into the end of part 1 and into part 2 for me?
Yeah. So the first part of it, I'd be looking for like real requirements and budget and reasons. Like I'll be looking for the things that, but I think let me take a step back. So the very start of it is you do need some kind of product thesis. It's very, very hard to have a general description with somebody about their problems. Like people are not aware of their problems. But interesting problems that people are aware of are generally bad business opportunities. Anything that somebody's aware of is usually something that is either really hard to solve or they're not actually that fussed in solving. Otherwise, they'd have solved it. So problems that people are aware of generally don't constitute good business opportunities. The problems that you want to track down are the ones that people aren't aware of. And the places where they just pour a bunch of time or effort or money in and don't think about it. So I'm going to pull something out of the air that I could be interviewing you about. And let's say I've got a thesis that actually it'd be really helpful for you to have, after you produce your podcast and after you've done the recording, it'd be really helpful for AI to go through it and chop it up and like find the entertaining bits and put them into nice clips and put them onto the web. And by the way, you're nodding like it would genuinely be helpful, which almost makes this problematic. It's easier to demonstrate when it's not. You don't normally hit something that's genuinely helpful to people. But if I did that, I wouldn't propose that to you. I'd say, so Liam, tell me, like, so you're a podcaster. Tell me what happens after you've produced your podcast. What's the next process and what are the things you have to go through? And I'd ask you how long that takes you and how much hassle it is. And do you pay somebody on Upwork to do those things for you? If not, why not? Like, is it that they're not good enough, or is it that you just don't want to spend the budget on it? How frequently do you do them? This is a really important question that most founders forget to ask. Frequency of usage of a product is like really directly proportional to value gained from it. So you really want to find problems that are frequent problems. If somebody's only hitting something once every 6 months or once a year, they're neither going to get a lot of value from it, nor are they likely to be in the market for it at the time you speak to them. So you're really searching for problems that are high value, high frequency. And so I'd ask you about all of that. And then likely, and I'm just guessing because I've done a bunch of these interviews, well, let's not guess. You're literally here. So at the end of the podcast, what's the process that you have to go through before it goes out and before it's marked as done?
Yeah, so I'll have a producer go through it that we pay for. We'll kind of cut out any dead space. We'll mark 3 to 5 clips for a shorts editor to then go over. They'll go back and forth to make sure the shorts are tuned in, to make sure the verbiage is right. And then we'll go through the process of then scheduling that, sending a follow-up email to the guest, letting them know about when that episode's being released. And then it'll be titling it for YouTube, for Spotify, tuning in that between me and my producer. And then even once the episode's launched, it's changing the titling and the thumbnails of the podcast to help with reach. It's trialing out different shorts. So yeah, there's a lot that goes into it in post-production.
Amazing. So in that answer, I've done this so frequently now that kind of I know how to land in a space, or I've got a better idea how to land in a space that might be fertile ground. And the reality is that we've landed in really, really fertile ground with this. And one of the ways that I know we've landed in fertile ground is that you pay 2 different people to do something for you. So that's immediately dialed me in. If you said to me, I do all of it, I would not go into this very enthusiastically. I'm like, if you're currently doing it all yourself, other people aren't good enough. That trade of time versus money doesn't work for you. It's possible, but very unlikely I'm going to produce software that's going to change that. So it is possible and it does happen. But I'll then explore with you and I'll say, okay, well, and you've actually given me a whole load of different hooks for product features. So there's the trimming out the dead space. There's what does the first editor do? Then there's the highlighting the parts for social media. Then there's the tuning them in. Then there's the testing different keywords for them. Now, I'm going to then ask you a whole bunch of questions about this. And I will ask you things like, so how many podcasts do you produce? How did you find the editor? Like, are they on staff permanently, or do you just pay them by the hour? Like, how much do you pay them? Tell me exactly what their job is. Take me through. And like, when are you frustrated by the results they give you back? And when are you really happy by the results they give you back? Because I'm modeling in my head, what's the product that I'm going to build? And I need to know what's the threshold it has to get over before it's good enough to now replace the competition for the product, who is your editor or the person who's producing the shorts. So I don't want to just think, oh yeah, I could do that. I'll build it and then I'll come back to you and like you'll see. I want to find out, what does that threshold look like? What am I going to have to build? And as part of that, and this is another really important thing, you really need to have technical ability. Like if you are producing, there's a huge, huge gap that many founders leave. They are non-technical founders who want to produce a technically differentiated product, and it's not going to happen. It's like me going into the restaurant industry and wanting to produce like better quality food than any of the other top chefs out there, but not hiring a better quality chef to do that. I am not going to produce better. I mean, can you imagine the madness of like wanting to set up a top London restaurant and then hiring your chef off Upwork? You just wouldn't do it. And yet this is how people expect multi-million-pound decacorn companies to just emerge. So I'm going to ask you all of these questions. I'm going to test like frequency and pain and how adhered you are to your current solutions. I'm also going to test whether I could even displace them. Like if that person is on your team and you're paying them anyway, and you don't have other work for them to do, and they're your childhood friend, you are unlikely to go and pay some extra money for some software to do that in parallel with them. So I need to know, like, is the current competitor for this displaceable? So during the first phase of the interview, I'm working out the needs for things. I'm like hearing spikes for different features and functionality, but I'm not mentioning anything to do with the product. And I will also then surface potential objections. So I'll find out, what things are you currently paying for? What things would you like to pay for that you're not paying for? Why did you not pay for them? Why didn't you spend that money on like the advanced ChatGPT or VO3 or whatever it happened to be? Like, what held you back? Because I'm starting to get a picture of where your financial sensitivities are. If you're saying, look, we'd buy it if it was useful, it's just not useful, that's a very different answer from, well, I would love to use it, but it's $200 a month. There's no way I can justify that. I'm getting information from all of this. So, and then I'll also find out, how many podcasts do you do? How long are you doing it for? Like, how many months of the year are you producing these podcasts? How long are you likely to be a customer? Can I sell you a monthly package? Or like, really, are you going to need to buy one, like pay as you go? Like, I'm processing all of these things at the start. Then I move to the second part and I will pitch you a solution. Very frequently, I will have evolved that solution during the first part of the pitch. It will be slightly different than the last person I pitched based on what you've said to me. Some of that is sales, but some of that is like, I am getting new information. And maybe you say to me, I don't care about the keyword testing, we only do a bit of it. I'm like, my head, I'm like, well, that'd be a lot of software to write anyway. So the other person like that, but I'm just going to mention it in passing. I'm going to focus on the editing part, and I'm really getting, and I will tell you exactly how it works. And I'll say, well, Liam, at the end of the podcast, we'll actually integrate with Riverside FM, pull this stuff out. We'll run it through a number of different filters, which highlight the most interesting and original pieces in it. Then we will combine that. Like, you can then run it through Descript and do like the quick editing that you do in Descript to like refine it. We will match up against the time codes in the original one, and we'll produce snippets, and then you can just like watch through them all, and then you can click on the snippets you want. We'll let you have voice feedback, and you can say tune this, trim this. Then we'll dial it all in, prep it up in the right things, and also we've got queuing to get it onto social media. So I'll paint a really clear picture, and I want to really get into the detail of like every element of the product with you, because I need to know where my assumptions break. So if I say something like, I'll do it through Riverside, and you're like, I don't actually use Riverside, which obviously I know you do because we're on Riverside right now. But then that will break an assumption for me. And I will think, well, maybe I don't do that. I will also actually generally not go too deep into the integrations and stuff because I can't build all of those initially. So I want to find the subset of features that are the critical subset for which you go, I will definitely buy that. Once I've done all of that, then the last part of the interview usually doesn't have to happen, because the last part of the interview is the part I use to find out whether you really want the thing. And in most interviews, nobody wants it. So the last part of the interview seldom happens. But if you get to that very precious point where somebody's like, holy shit, that sounds amazing, I will definitely buy that. In the last part, what I'll do is switch tack and try and persuade you using all of the reasons that you gave me in the first section of the interview that you in fact will not use this product. So I'll say, well, Liam, this is going to be, and I will give you a very clear, direct price point. I won't be like, what will you pay for this? I'll just say, look, this is going to cost £40 a month. Because I would be like, how much are you spending on your editor? How much hassle, etc. And so I'll just be like, okay, so it's £99 a month for like all you can eat. And you're like, oh yeah, I definitely take it. I'll then come back and say something like, well, Liam, let me ask you a question. You said that you do 2 seasons a year and there are like 8 weeks in between each season. At £99 a month, isn't it going to get annoying that you're paying for it in between? And I'm not going to persuade you, give you an answer to that. I'm just going to see what you say. And then you say, no, it's fine. Like, it's the way all of our stuff works. I don't really care. It's still cheaper than my editor. And actually, we do a couple of like teaser spots during the off season anyway. So it'd be quite useful to have you there. Or you say, yeah, I would hate that. Like, it'd be super annoying. I just want to pay as I go. And like, that wouldn't work for me. And then I'll say, well, look, like one of the challenges with this is it's going to get stuff right, but you're going to probably have to watch 5 or 6 clips for every clip that you get through. And it sounded like you're really time pushed and your current editor just gives you like 2 clips. So like judging by everything you said, it sounds like actually this would be more hassle than your current editor is, at which point you either push back or you like collapse. And if you push back on everything, that's the point where I know it's a product I should build. And if you collapse, I will keep moving on.
You'd mentioned earlier that it's better to start with a product that people love, something smaller, and then expand it to a product a lot of people like. When you're going through this process, the kind of solution that you're talking about here is quite full service and that it can do everything. How do you know when to tune in on like one specific part of that product between something that's full service? So for example, like I know that a very good shorts editing thing that's done with AI is Opus Clip, for example, right? But what you're suggesting here is something that's way more the full cycle. So when do you know when to like tune into something specific and when to just keep it more broad?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, I will keep paring it back. And I'll also, I'll be really interested in competitive software. So if somebody says this is a huge problem and there are other things on the market that solve it and they're not using them, I'm really going to question whether it's really a big problem for them. I will want to hear them say very specific reasons why they're not using the other stuff. Over sequential interviews, I will refine and reduce the offering. So at first, you're just going on this enormous fishing trip and you just want to find out, like, where are you getting pings? Where are people interested and coming back in with things they're interested in? So you actually just want to throw a lot of bread on the water and see where the fish pop up. But you can't build for all of these different things simultaneously at the start. You can only build for a subset. So I'll then hypothesize, I might be able to some extent in the interview with you, like do this, but probably the water's too muddy at this point. So in the next interview, I'll then drop out the other things. They'll be like, no integration with the Riverside FM, no integration with this. I will just say, all it does is like pull out the sections of the clips and then give you the time codes that you can then put into. It's got like a script that you can integrate into Descript and then it'll pull the stuff out for you. And I want to see, do I get the same reaction? Do I get the same adherence to it? And if I do, then that's great. That's where I start. But I'm going to keep paring it back until paring it back further weakens somebody's enthusiasm for it.
Have you used AI in this research process before to eliminate maybe some selective hearing or any bias and use an individual?
I haven't had to do this in anger for some time, but there's two different ways that I would use AI and kind of am planning to do it. One is normally I would take a lot of notes during the interview and I would much rather have AI do that. And there's actually a lot of information that you need to extract and structure and put into different places if you do it really well. So it's a great candidate for AI. And the other is that you can actually use, for the very, very initial parts of this, if you're really smart about it, you can use LLMs to do some of the initial fishing trips. So you can actually, you would never want to build the company on it. But when you're just like sitting around a dinner table going, well, should we do this or should we do this? You can actually run synthetic interviews and you can get the LLM to get into the head of that person. And you can run this entire process with them and find out roughly like, would it resonate in that space? And I've done that with a client and we did that when we were very time pressured. We did that for a product they were considering. And we ran a whole load of synthetic interviews with potential customers. And because the client knew the space really well, they were confident that actually what was coming back from those interviews, those synthetic interviews, was pretty accurate.
In terms of when you're building or proposing a solution, how many of these kind of solutions that are a SaaS business just now or a ChatGPT wrapper do you think will be able to just be replicated through agentic workflows and through custom GPTs and through solutions that people can build with Cursor? And what's the differentiator between that and something that is an entirely new SaaS and can't be built with N8N and OpenAI and Claude and so on? What's the separator here?
Aaron Levy from Box. Aaron Levy is one of the co-founders of Box, and he said something I think is pretty good on this. He said the more software is involved in delivering your solution, the safer it is from being enveloped by AI. So if the nuances of what you need to give to the person involve a bunch of software that sits around the part that's AI, it's probably going to be pretty secure. So if we take the example of the editing the clips from Riverside, like for it to be useful, it really does need an integration with Riverside and it does need an integration to post it onto LinkedIn and so on. Like those things aren't going to be built by Claude or OpenAI. And whilst the rate of software development is going to accelerate, as long as you're sitting on top of that, your rate of development is also going to accelerate as well. So if you look at a problem like that, it's not likely to be solved really quickly by the others. If somebody came to me and said, I've written an application that's better at writing code than Cursor, I would be very, very wouldn't write it off, but I would be very hesitant before I got enthusiastic about it. I'll add one other thing to that, which is that I think there's the software that you write on top, but there's also like how specific and nuanced is the interface that somebody needs in order to engage with the software. I'm certain there are a whole load of things that currently ChatGPT can do just fine, but somebody needs automated, and actually quite a thin layer of automation that really most of the AI value is in ChatGPT. Somebody having the automation that just like, you take the fixer example, reads the email and drafts the response. That there's much more to what they do than that, but that bit of automation counts for a lot. And yes, they could copy it out and paste it into ChatGPT, and yes, they could write out the wrapper for it, but they don't want to, and that friction makes it not worthwhile doing.
Peter, I want to thank you for your time, and I really appreciate you coming on today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Great interview. Thanks so much for having me, Liam.